Evelyn Harper walked into that store with exact coins counted in her fist, and her list folded tight in her coat, and Gerald Calloway looked her dead in the eye and said, "Take your business elsewhere." She put every coin back. Slow, one by one, and she walked out without a word because 14 months of being called a liar had burned every last tear out of her. She had nothing left. No one left. Until a mountain cowboy stepped off his horse on a dirt road and asked her something nobody in that town had ever bothered to ask. He asked what she needed. If that stopped your heart the way it stopped mine, subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far Evelyn's story travels. The summer of 1883 came to Harlan Creek, like it always did, hot, dry, and merciless. The kind of heat that baked the earth until it cracked and made men short-tempered before noon. But for Evelyn Harper, the heat wasn't the cruelest thing pressing down on her that July morning. It was the eyes. She felt them before she even reached the end of Main Street. Felt them through the window of the Mercantile, where Margaret Stowe pretended to straighten a bolt of calico but tracked every step Evelyn took. Felt them from the rocking chairs outside Holt's barber shop, where 3 old men stopped their conversation the moment she passed. Felt them from children who had been told, in low voices and with serious faces, to stay away from that woman. Evelyn kept her chin up. She had learned to do that, learned it the hard way, over the past 14 months, since the trial. Since everything fell apart, she carried a canvas bag over one arm, her list of supplies written in careful script on a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket. And she walked the way a person walks when they know the ground might give out beneath them, but they refuse to let anyone see the fear. She needed flour, salt, a new length of rope, a tin of linseed oil for the fence post she'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. Simple things. The kind of things any woman in any town would buy on a Tuesday morning without a second thought. But Evelyn Harper was not any woman in any town, not anymore. She pushed through the door of Calloway's general store, and the small bell above the frame rang out clear and bright. And the 2 women standing at the counter, Ruth Alden and her daughter-in-law Patricia, went quiet, so fast it was like someone had cut a string. Evelyn didn't look at them. She moved to the shelves along the left wall and began reading labels she already knew by heart, just to give her eyes somewhere to go. That wasn't another person's judgment. "I heard she's still trying to work the Dunmore place," Ruth said, not quietly. "Not even close to quietly. She ought to leave," Patricia said. The decent thing would have been to leave after the verdict. Evelyn's fingers closed around a tin of coffee. She set it back. Reached for the linseed oil instead. "Frank Dunmore's wife hasn't slept a full night since," Ruth went on. "And you know whose fault that is." The bell above the door rang again. More customers. Evelyn felt the room contract around her. Old Gerald Calloway himself came in from the back, wiping his hands on his apron. He was 60-some years old, with a white mustache and eyes that had seen most of what Harlan Creek had to offer. He saw Evelyn, and his face did something complicated, not cruelty exactly, but not welcome either. Something worn down and uncomfortable. The look of a man who'd made a private decision and wasn't entirely proud of it. "Miss Harper," he said. "Mr. Calloway." She placed the oil on the counter. "Flour, too. 20 pounds if you have it. And salt." 2 pounds. He didn't move immediately. He looked at his other customers. Ruth Alden had her eyebrows raised in that particular way that was its own form of social pressure, its own quiet demand that a man choose a side. Calloway cleared his throat. "I appreciate your business, Miss Harper. But I got to ask you to take it elsewhere. I got regulars to think about." The room didn't go quiet. It had already been quiet. But something shifted in the quality of that silence, and Evelyn felt it settle over her skin like a burn. She stood very still for a moment. Then she picked up the linseed oil and set it back on the shelf where she'd bounced it, with a care and deliberateness that cost her something she couldn't name. "Understood," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. She was so ferociously, privately proud of that one small thing. She walked back out through that bright little bell and into the July heat, and she kept walking until she was past the end of Main Street, past the last building, past the place where the road bent toward the river. Then she stopped. She stood at the side of that road with her empty canvas bag and her folded list of supplies, and she looked out at the ridge of mountains that rimmed the valley to the north, and she breathed. Just breathed. In and out, slow and even. She would not cry. She had made that rule back in March when the verdict came, and she had kept it. She would not give this town her tears. They had already taken enough. What she permitted herself was this. She closed her eyes, and for 30 seconds she let herself feel the full weight of what they'd done to her. The store, the trial, the 14 months of being looked through like glass. She let it land, all of it. Then she opened her eyes. She still needed flour and rope. And she knew of a trading post 7 miles east run by a Tejano family named Reyes, who didn't know her story and didn't care about Harlan Creek's opinions, and she would go there even if it took her the better part of the day. She was calculating the walk, whether she could make it and be back before dark when she heard the horse. It wasn't an unusual sound on that road. But something in the rhythm of it made her turn. A man came around the bend at a slow, unhurried pace. His horse was a dark bay with a wide chest and intelligent eyes, a mountain horse, built for difficult terrain and long days. The man himself was somewhere north of 35, lean in the way that comes from real labor rather than shortage, with a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 4 or 5 days, and a hat that had been good once and was still serviceable. He wore a faded blue shirt rolled to the elbows. His boots were scuffed. His hands, resting easy on the reins, were the kind of hands that had spent serious time with ropes and fence posts and cold weather. He wasn't from Harlan Creek. Evelyn had lived here 3 years, and she knew every face in the valley. This man was not one of them. He slowed as he drew even with her. His eyes swept the road ahead, then came back to her, and she recognized the kind of look that wasn't rude, just observant. A man accustomed to reading situations before he stepped into them. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, sir," she said. He didn't ride on. He sat his horse for a moment, looking at her with that same unhurried assessment, and she got the distinct impression he had already noticed the empty bag. The too careful posture, the road that led away from town in the wrong direction. "You need a ride somewhere?" he asked. Not pushy, just asking. "I'm fine," she said, which was not an answer to his question, and they both knew it. He didn't call her on it. He looked past her toward the town, then back. "Calloway's closed to you?" She blinked. Of all the things she had expected from a stranger on a road, that directness was not among them. "I don't see how that's your business," she said, and there was no heat in it, just truth. "It isn't," he agreed. He shifted in the saddle. "I've been riding since before dawn. I'm heading into town for supplies and then up toward the ridgeline. You need anything from the store, I'll get it for you." "No trouble." She stared at him. In 14 months, not one person in this valley had offered her anything. Not a spare egg, not a kind word, not a single moment of uncomplicated human decency. And here was a complete stranger, offering to walk into Gerald Calloway's store and purchase her supplies as casually as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Why would you do that?" she asked. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because you need flour and salt," he said finally. "And because whatever this town thinks it knows about you, I don't know any of it. And I find I'd rather start from scratch." She looked at him for a long moment. The sun was high and direct, and it showed everything plainly: the steadiness of his eyes, the absence of agenda in his face, the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are comfortable inside their own skin. "Evelyn Harper," she said. He nodded, like the name meant nothing to him, and meant it honestly. "Caleb Whitaker. 20 pounds of flour," she said. 2 pounds of salt. A length of good rope, 30 feet. And linseed oil, if he has any left. Caleb Whitaker reached into his shirt pocket and produced a small notebook and a stub of pencil, and he wrote it down. Every item, without comment. "I'll be about 20 minutes, he said. He rode on into town. She watched him go. He was back in 18 minutes. The supplies were wrapped in paper and tied with twine and loaded into a set of saddlebags with a matter-of-fact efficiency that told her this was not the first time he'd done an errand for someone else. He handed them down to her without ceremony. "What do I owe you?" she asked. He named a figure that matched what the supplies would have cost, nothing added for the trouble. She counted out the coins from a small leather pouch she kept in her coat and held them up to him. He leaned down and took them. "Did Calloway say anything?" she asked, and then immediately regretted asking. It was not her business. She didn't need to know. Caleb settled back in his saddle. "He said you were trouble. And I told him I'd form my own opinion." He glanced toward the North Ridge. "You said you're working the Dunmore land?" She straightened. "My land. I purchased it legal and proper 14 months ago." Something crossed his face, not surprise exactly, more like a reassessment. "Your land," he said. "How far?" 4 miles north, then up the first switchback past the pine grove. There's a stone marker at the corner of the property." He looked at the sky. The sun was past its peak but still well up. "That's a long walk with 40-some pounds of supplies." "I've done it before. I don't doubt it." He looked at her. "I'll carry them up for you. I'm heading that direction anyway." She almost said no. The word was right there, the reflex so well practiced she could have said it in her sleep. She said it to everyone, had been saying it since the trial, because accepting anything from anyone in this valley meant owing them something, and owing people things had a way of being used against you. But he wasn't from this valley, and his eyes were the same steady gray they'd been since he first tipped his hat on the road, and there was nothing in them that looked like leverage or judgment or the particular hunger of a person collecting a debt. "All right," she said. They walked. He led the horse. She walked beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while, and this was the strangest thing, the thing she turned over in her mind for a long time afterward, it was comfortable. The silence between them did not press or demand or accuse. It was simply two people walking in the direction at the same pace. The road climbed. The valley fell away behind them. The air changed, cooled by a few degrees, sharpened by the smell of pine. Somewhere to their left a creek ran fast and clear, and the sound of it filled the spaces between their footsteps. "You're not from this part of Colorado," she said. "Not a question. Up near Garnet Pass. I run cattle up there. Come down a few times a year for supplies and business." "You have family up there?" A beat. No. She heard what was in that single word, not self-pity, but the factual statement of a man who had made his peace with a particular kind of solitude. She recognized it because she had one like it of her own. "How long have you been on the Dunmore on your land?" he asked. 3 years since I bought it. 14 months since the trial." "You don't have to tell me about the trial." "I know." She looked at the road ahead. "Franklin Dunmore is a banker. He came to me a year before everything fell apart, asking if I'd seen any issue with his water rights. I'd been tracking the creek levels since I arrived, keeping records. He had a legitimate claim against the upstream ranchers who'd been diverting water without proper filing." She paused. "I helped him build the case. Spent 4 months on it. He won. That sounds like a good outcome, it was. Until his wife found his letters to me." Another pause, shorter. "They were professional letters. Every single one of them. Business correspondence about creek levels and water law. But she didn't read them that way, and she didn't keep her interpretation to herself, and Franklin Dunmore let her believe what she wanted to believe, because it was easier than telling her the truth about how boring those letters actually were. Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. He let them blame you. Completely. Said he barely knew me. Said I'd approached him. Said the correspondence was my idea, and the records you kept. The water data, produced at trial, dismissed as fabricated. She said it without emotion. The emotion had burned off long ago, replaced by something harder and colder. He had better lawyers. Caleb stopped walking. He didn't make a production of it, didn't turn to face her with some dramatic expression. He just stopped, and she stopped beside him, and he stood looking at the ridge ahead with his hat brim casting a shadow over his eyes. "So you spent 4 months helping a man save his livelihood," he said slowly, "and when it cost him his marriage, he fed you to the town." "Yes, and the town ate you up." He started walking again. "That's a hell of a thing to do to a person." "It is," she agreed. They walked. Her property came into view around the bend of the trail, a log cabin, modestly built but sound, with a barn that needed paint and a fence that ran straight and true, except for the section along the north side that she'd been meaning to fix. A kitchen garden ran along the east wall. 3 horses moved in the paddock. Caleb stopped at the gate. He looked at the horses, really looked at them, the way a man looks who knows horses, and something in his expression shifted. One of them, a gray mare with a white blaze, came to the fence and pressed her nose against the rail. "That mare yours?" he asked. "She is. Her name's December. Bought her 3 years ago, when she was barely green-broke and half-starved. She's the best horse I've ever worked with." Caleb reached out and let December smell his hand before he offered his palm flat. The mare accepted it with the dignified calm of an animal that has been handled correctly for a long time. "You broke her yourself?" he asked. "Trained her, not broke-trained." "There's a difference." He glanced at her then, and for the first time there was something in his expression that went slightly beyond neutral. Not admiration exactly. Something more like recognition. The way you look at someone when they say a thing you've thought yourself, but never heard anyone else say out loud. "There is a difference," he said. "Most people don't see it." He unloaded her supplies from the saddlebags and carried them to the door of the cabin, and she unlocked it, and he set them just inside the threshold with the same no-ceremony efficiency he'd had since the beginning. "You said you were heading to the ridgeline," she said. "That's another 4 miles at least." "About that." She looked at the sky. The afternoon was moving. "You could water your horse before you go." "There's a trough around the side." He nodded. He led his bay around and let it drink, and while it did he leaned against the fence rail and looked out at the valley below. And she stood in the doorway of her cabin and did not quite know what to do with a person who had spent the last 2 hours being decent to her, with no apparent motive. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. "Caleb," he said, without looking away from the valley. "Caleb." "Why?" He looked at her then. "Why did you stop?" she said. "On the road. You could have ridden past." He considered that for a moment, the same way he seemed to consider most things genuinely, without performance. "I stopped because you were standing of a road by yourself in the middle of the day with an empty bag," he said. "And something about that didn't sit right with me. And then when you told me what you needed, you said it plain, like a person who's used to being refused and is trying not to flinch about it." He paused. "I don't like seeing people work that hard to pretend they're fine." She didn't have an answer for that. She stood in her doorway and looked at him and felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been wedged in place for a very long time, and the shift wasn't comfortable, and she wasn't sure it was welcome. But it was real. "I'll be coming back through this way in about 3 weeks," he said. He straightened from the fence rail. "If you need supplies from town, I can arrange it the same way." "No trouble. You don't have to do that, I know." He checked the cinch on his saddle with a practiced tug. "Think about it." He mounted. His bay settled beneath him with the patience of a well-partnered animal. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. "Caleb." He looked at her. "Whatever this town told you," she said, "it told you the version that suited Franklin Dunmore." "I figured," he said. "The water records were real." "I believe you." She looked at him, this man she had known for less than 3 hours, this stranger who had walked into Calloway's store and bought her supplies, and carried them up a mountain road and watered his horse at her trough, and asked nothing in return. This man who had said, "I believe you like it," cost him nothing, because for him it genuinely didn't, because he had no stake in this town's story and had chosen, consciously, to hear hers first. "Why?" she said again, and this time she meant something different by it. He understood. He thought about it honestly, the way he seemed to do everything. "Because nobody starts from scratch if nobody gives them the ground to stand on," he said. Figured I had some ground to spare. He touched the brim of his hat. He rode up the trail toward the ridgeline, and the dust settled behind him, and the gray mare at the fence watched him go, and Evelyn Harper stood in the doorway of her cabin in the July heat and breathed. She did not cry. She had made that rule. But her throat was tight, and her eyes were warm, and she stayed in that doorway for a long time after he disappeared around the bend of the trail. 3 weeks was a long time. She knew how to count days, had been doing it for 14 months, marking them by the progress of her garden and the growth of her horses and the slow repair of her fences. She had enough supplies to last, if she was careful. She always was. She was not waiting for him to come back. She told herself that very clearly on multiple occasions over the following 3 weeks. She was not waiting. But on the morning of the 22nd day, she found herself at the paddock fence earlier than usual, looking down the trail that came in from the south, watching the place where the path bent out of sight. And December stood beside her, with one ear cocked in the same direction, and the two of them waited together in the early morning light without admitting to either waiting. He came around the bend at mid-morning. Same dark bay. Same rolled sleeves. Same hat. He raised one hand in greeting when he saw her at the fence, and she raised one back, and neither of them was particularly surprised. He pulled up at the gate. "I've got some mail for you," he said. Picked it up from the post, and Calloway had a new shipment of linseed oil. "Got you another tin." She took the letters he held down to her, 3 of them, the return addresses from places that knew her before Harlan Creek, people who had not forgotten she existed. "How much do I owe you for the oil?" she asked. He told her. She paid him. He didn't move to go. "The fence on your north side," he said, looking past her. "I know. I've been meaning to get to it. I've got 3 hours before I need to head back up." He dismounted. "2 sets of hands make it faster." She looked at him. "You came down from Garnet Pass to pick up my mail and fix my fence?" "I came down for supplies," he said mildly. "The rest is just good sense." She opened the gate. He walked through, and December stretched her neck out and pushed her nose against his shoulder, and he rubbed the mare's face with the comfortable familiarity of a man who had been doing this his whole life. "You two made friends fast," Evelyn said. "She's a good judge of character," he said. "She is," Evelyn agreed. They worked the fence for 2 hours and 40 minutes. They talked about cattle and horses, and the particular challenges of mountain terrain in winter, and the way the creek ran differently in a dry year. They argued, briefly and without heat, about the best way to seat a post in rocky ground. She was right. He acknowledged it. When they finished, she made coffee, and they drank it standing at the paddock fence, watching the horses move in the afternoon light. "You don't ask many questions," she said. "No," he agreed. "Most people ask questions. Most people are looking for something to confirm what they already think," he said. "I'd rather just watch." She looked at him. "And what do you see?" He thought about it. "A woman who knows what she's doing," he said. "With horses, with land, with herself." She looked away. Looked at the mountains. "I used to be more than that." "What were you before?" "A person people trusted." "You're still that," he said. "I trust you." She looked at him again, and this time she let herself look directly, the way she had been carefully not doing all afternoon. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I know what I see. And I know what the town says doesn't match what I'm looking at. And when those two things don't line up, I always bet on what I can see." The sun was getting low. He needed to head up the trail. "I'll be back in a month," he said. "Maybe less if I come down for cattle business." She nodded. "Miss Harper," he said, and the formality of it was gentle, careful. Evelyn, she said. Something moved in his expression, brief, contained but real. Evelyn. He settled the name like he was making room for it. Take care of yourself up here. I always do. He mounted. He looked down at her. But it's different when someone means it. He rode up the trail. She watched him go. December stood at the fence and watched too. This time, when Evelyn went inside, she allowed herself something she hadn't allowed in 14 months. She sat at her kitchen table in the late afternoon light, and she did not think about what she had lost. She thought about what was still here: the garden, the horses, the fence that ran straight and true on 3 sides and now on all 4, and a man named Caleb Whitaker who had come back as promised and had not asked anything of her except the chance to help fix a fence. It wasn't trust. She was nowhere near trust. But it was something. Something new. Something she did not yet have a name for, but could feel beginning to take root in the dry, hard ground of everything that had survived the worst 14 months of her life. She folded her hands on the table. She breathed. She did not cry. But she let herself feel it, this small, careful, entirely unasked for thing, and she did not push it away. He came back in 3 weeks, like he said, and then again 2 weeks after that. And then 10 days after that. Evelyn stopped counting the intervals. She told herself it was because she had better things to track creek levels, feed inventory, the slow progress of her kitchen garden against the summer heat. She told herself the counting had nothing to do with him. December didn't believe her. The mare had taken to standing at the south end of the paddock in the mornings, ears forward, watching the trail. Horses didn't lie about what they were waiting for. Evelyn had always respected that about them. The 4th time Caleb came down from Garnet Pass, he brought a problem with him. She heard his horse on the trail before she saw him, and she came out of the barn with a brush still in her hand, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. He rode the same dark bay, sat the same easy way, but his jaw was set in a line she hadn't seen before, and he pulled up at the gate without his usual unhurried scan of the property. "I need to tell you something," he said, "before someone else does." She put the brush down on the fence rail. "All right. I ran into Gerald Calloway at the trading post east of here. 2 days ago, he dismounted. He didn't open the gate right away, just stood on the other side of it, and she understood that he was giving her space to hear this standing on her own ground. He told me I was making a mistake, coming up here. I expect he did. He told me what Franklin Dunmore has been saying." Caleb's voice was level, but there was something underneath it, something compressed and careful. "Not just about the letters, about your character. About the kind of woman he says you are." Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. She had known in the abstract that the story had kept spreading. She just hadn't heard it said plainly to her face in a while. And I told Calloway the same thing I'm telling you now." He looked at her directly. "I don't believe a word of it." She searched his face for the thing she had learned to look for, the slight softening of certainty, the hedge, the but. That always came after "I believe you" in her experience. She didn't find it. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "What Calloway says shouldn't change anything." "It shouldn't," he agreed. "But you deserve to know what's being said, and you deserve to hear that someone heard it and didn't change their mind." She opened the gate. He came through. They didn't talk about Dunmore again that day. They worked. She had 3 horses that needed trimming, and Caleb, without being asked, helped hold the first one steady while she worked. He was good at it. Good at being still, good at keeping a hand firm without gripping, good at talking to an animal in the low continuous murmur that kept them calm. "You've done this before," she said. "My mother kept horses," he said. "Before." She waited to see if he would say more. He didn't. She let it go, but the before sat in her mind for a long time afterward. It was on his 6th visit that she finally asked him something she had been holding back for weeks. They had finished the evening chores. She'd gotten into the habit of having things almost done by the time he arrived. because somehow the last hour of work went faster with another person, and somehow the coffee afterward lasted longer than it should have, and somehow the light was always further into evening than she'd intended. By the time he rode back up the trail, they were at the paddock fence. December was leaning her big gray head against Caleb's arm in a way that was frankly embarrassing for the dignity of a horse. "What happened to your family?" Evelyn asked. He didn't startle. He'd learned her directness by now, and she'd learned he didn't need softening. "Wife and daughter," he said. "Fever. Winter of 1876. She felt the weight of it, not just the facts, but the specific cruelty of the year, the season, the way those two words sat together. Wife and daughter. 7 years ago. Long enough to stop being a wound that bled, but not long enough to be anything other than a permanent change in the shape of a person." "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it without decoration. "So am I," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "I went up to the ridgeline about a year later. Built the cabin. Bought the cattle. Figured if I stayed busy enough and far enough from anyone, the grief would eventually get bored and leave." "Did it?" "No," he said. "But it got quieter. Learned to live in the same house with it." He glanced at her. "You know something about that, I reckon." "I do," she said. Her grief was different, no graves, just a reputation and a future she'd built that got dismantled by a man who couldn't be honest with his wife. But grief came in all kinds of shapes, and they were all heavy. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." "Why'd you stay?" He turned to look at her after the trial. "After Calloway's. After all of it. You could have gone somewhere you weren't known. Started fresh somewhere. Nobody had a story about you already." She thought about it. She always thought about his questions before answering them, because they deserved it. "Because leaving would have meant they were right," she said. "Because this is my land, and I bought it legal, and I worked it honest, and the fact that a coward let me take the blame for his marriage doesn't change either of those things." She paused. "And because December was already settled here. She doesn't trailer well." Caleb looked at the mare, who chose that precise moment to sneeze loudly on his shoulder. Something that had never quite shown itself before appeared on his face, then brief and real and unguarded. He laughed. Not a polite sound, not a social gesture. An actual laugh, the kind that came from somewhere beneath the control and the quietness, and it lasted only a few seconds before he reeled it back in, but it had been there and she had seen it, and she filed it away somewhere careful. "You're something else, Evelyn Harper," he said, wiping his shoulder. "I've been called worse," she said. He looked at her. The laughter had passed, but something of it remained, some loosening around his eyes. And she felt the shift between them that she had been aware of for weeks, the slow and careful shift of two people who started as strangers, and were becoming something else without having agreed to it. She looked away first. "Back at the mountains. You should go," she said. "The trail's not good after dark." "No," he agreed. He straightened from the fence. "Same time next week?" She had told herself, at the beginning, that she would not let these visits become a habit. That she would not organize her days around them. That she would not be the woman who rearranged her life around a man's schedule again. "I'll be here," she said. He was back in 6 days. Not a week. 6 days, and he didn't explain the difference. And she didn't ask, and that itself told her something. He brought news with him this time. Not good news. Wade Pruitt was in town, he said, before he'd even fully dismounted. She knew the name. Everyone in the valley knew the name. Wade Pruitt owned the Consolidated Land Company, which was a fine official-sounding name for an operation that had spent the last 4 years buying up struggling homesteads by any means that worked, and if honest purchase didn't work, other means presented themselves. Pruitt had the kind of money that made men patient, and the kind of patience that made men dangerous. "What about him?" she said. Caleb tied the bay at the fence. His movements were measured, deliberate, the way they got when he was working through something. "He's been buying up the water rights along the lower creek." Got 4 of them now, all legal from ranchers who were herding for cash. He looked at her. Your Upper Creek access runs through the Henderson property. Jack Henderson took a meeting with Pruitt's man last week. Evelyn felt something cold move through her chest. The creek was everything. Without the Upper Creek access, her summer pasture dried out, her garden failed, her horses went thirsty, and the whole careful operation she had built over 3 years fell apart in a season. Henderson hasn't signed anything, she said, hoping. Not yet. Caleb's jaw was doing that set thing again. But Pruitt's man left him a number, and Henderson's wife is sick. Medical bills. She pressed her lips together. She understood exactly what that meant. You didn't blame a man for doing what he had to do for a sick wife. You just had to figure out what to do about the fact that your survival was downstream of his decision. If Henderson sells, she said, thinking out loud, Pruitt controls my water. Yes, and then he approaches me about buying the land. At whatever number he feels like offering, Caleb said. Which won't be a fair one. She turned and walked to the fence and put both hands on the top rail and looked out at her horses and her garden and the creek that ran silver at the edge of her property. She had spent 3 years building this. She had survived the trial and the gossip and the store that wouldn't sell her flour. She had fixed every fence on this property and trained 3 horses and grown enough food to see herself through 2 winters. She was not going to watch it get quietly choked off by a man with a ledger who had never done an honest day of physical labor in his life. I need to talk to Henderson, she said. He won't listen to you. Caleb's voice was direct but not unkind. That's the truth of it. Not because of anything you've done. But because you're the woman the town already decided not to trust, and right now Henderson's scared and scared men go with what's familiar. She knew he was right. And knowing he was right made her furious in the specific cold way that was worse than hot anger, the fury of being correct about something terrible. Then what, she said. Then I talked to Henderson, Caleb said. She turned. That's not your problem. No, he said. But it's something I can do. He held her gaze steadily. I'm not doing it to take over. I'm doing it because I have standing in this valley that you don't, for no good reason. If statsting can be useful, then I'd rather use it than pretend the inequality doesn't exist. She stared at him for a long moment. That's the most words I've ever heard you say at once. Felt like the situation called for it. She looked away. Back at the creek. If Henderson agrees to hold off even a month, that gives me time. Time for what? She had been thinking about this. She'd been thinking about it for a long time. Longer than Pruitt had been a threat, since before Caleb Whitaker had ridden around the bend of that road and bought her flour and changed the particular quality of her solitude. She had paper records, creek-level data going back 3 years. Rainfall, water flow measurements, the kind of meticulous documentation she had kept for Franklin Dunmore, the kind that had been dismissed as fabricated in a courtroom run by men who already knew which verdict they were going to reach. But those records hadn't disappeared, and there were people, federal people, territorial water authority people who did not answer to local judges or local bankers or local land companies. Time to file, she said. There's a federal water claim process. It's slower than the county system, and it's harder to control. If I file a prior appropriation claim through the territorial office in Denver, it doesn't matter what Pruitt buys locally. My upstream access is documented through federal records. Caleb was quiet. He was thinking the way he did seriously, without filling the silence with noise. You'd need to get to Denver, he said. I'd need to get my documentation there, yes. That's 4 days' ride. I know how far Denver is. He didn't smile exactly, but something shifted in his expression. I know you do. He was quiet another moment. You can't leave the horses that long. She had already thought of this too, and it was the thing that had been blocking her. The horses needed daily care. December especially, the mare had a hoof that had been giving her trouble, a soft spot at the toe, that needed monitoring and regular treatment. You didn't leave a horse like that, without someone who knew what to look for." "No," she agreed. "I'll stay," he said. She looked at him. "I can work the ridgeline from here for a few weeks," he said. "The cattle are summer ranging. They don't need daily management right now. I can be here for the horses while you ride to Denver." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You'd run my ranch while I'm gone." Run is a strong word. I'd keep things from falling apart. Caleb. She said his name with a particular weight, the kind that meant she needed him to hear her and not just listen. "I cannot have a man staying on this property. You understand what this town would do with that." He understood. She watched him understand it the way his face didn't change exactly, but something behind it registered the specific ugly arithmetic of reputation in a small valley where a woman's character was already considered forfeit. "Right," he said. "The barn." "What?" "I'll sleep in the barn." He said it like it was the most practical thing in the world. "Anyone comes by, I'm hired help working the property while you're away on business." Which is accurate. You're not hired help. What am I then? She didn't have an answer for that. She stood at the fence, and the question hung in the July heat between them, and neither of them moved to take it back or explain it away. "Someone who gives a damn," he said quietly. "That's all. Just someone who gives a damn about what happens to you." And to this place. He looked at the horses, at December, who had come to stand near him, as if she'd been following the conversation, and approved of his position. "Let me help. Without cost to you." She looked at him for a long time, long enough that December got impatient and pushed her nose against Caleb's chest. "2 weeks," Evelyn said. "I'll need 2 weeks to make the ride and file and get back." "I'll be here," he said. She nodded. She turned back to the barn. At the doorway she stopped. "Caleb." He looked up from where he'd been rubbing December's nose. "The hay's in the left section," she said. "And December gets a bran mash every third day. She'll try to tell you it's every day. Don't believe her." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Close enough. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. She left on a Tuesday before dawn. She packed light, her documentation in an oilskin sleeve, money for the road, enough food for the first 2 days, her coat and her rifle and her good horse, a roan gelding named August who was steadier on long travel than December. Caleb was already up. He'd built a fire and made coffee and had it ready without being asked, and she drank it standing in the dark, because there was no point pretending this was anything but what it was: a person leaving, and a person staying. And both of them, knowing it mattered more than either, had said out loud. "Be careful on the pass," he said. "It's been dry, but there's been some rock movement on the south face." "I know the pass, I know you know." He handed her the second tin cup, which she put in her saddlebag for later. "I'll have Henderson talk to by the time you're back." "Don't promise what you can't deliver." "I don't," he said. She mounted. August settled beneath her, ready. She looked down at Caleb, standing in the pre-dawn dark, the fire behind him, coffee in his hand. And she thought, not for the first time, and with the same mixture of wonder and unease she always felt about how strange it was that this man had come into her life from a road she'd been walking alone and had simply declined to leave. 2 weeks, she said. "I'll be here," he said. She rode out. The first 3 days of the ride were straightforward. She knew the route, knew where to camp, knew which creeks were safe for August, and which were silted up from the dry summer. She kept her pace steady and her mind on the miles. But the 4th day, somewhere past the 2nd range, the weather turned. Not violent, not a storm in any dramatic sense, but a gray, heavy, relentless rain that started mid-morning and did not stop. The road went soft, and August had to work for every mile, and she was wet through by noon, and still wet through when she made camp at dusk. She ate cold food and slept in her coat with August hobbled under the trees. And she lay on her back in the dark, listening to the rain, and thought about the creek records in their oilskin sleeve, and told herself they were dry because she had checked the sleeve twice before dark, and they were dry. She thought about December's hoof. She thought about Caleb sleeping in her barn. She fell asleep thinking about the particular way he had said "I'll be here" both times she'd needed to hear it, like a man who understood that those words meant something real and was not going to say them casually. She arrived in Denver on the 6th day, stiff and road-tired, and 4 pounds lighter from the kind of travel that doesn't allow for comfortable eating. The Territorial Water Office was a 2-story brick building that smelled like paper and pipe tobacco, and the particular bureaucratic patience of people who processed a great deal of paperwork and felt no personal urgency about any of it. The clerk at the front desk was a young man with spectacles who looked at her documentation, and then at her, and then at her documentation again. "These are your records," he said. 3 years of creek-level measurements, rainfall logs, and water flow data for the upper tributary of Black Pine Creek in Harlan County, she said. "I'm filing a prior appropriation claim on behalf of my homestead. The property is legally registered in my name. This is quite comprehensive," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." He looked up at her with an expression that was somewhere between surprise and reassessment. "Most homesteaders who come in don't have anything like this." "I know," she said. "That's why I kept it." He brought in a superior. The superior was a man named Hartley, 50-ish, with a precise gray mustache and the manner of someone who had been handling land disputes for decades and had stopped being impressed by most things. He sat down with her records and read them. Actually, read them, page by page, in silence, while Evelyn sat across the desk and kept her hands still in her lap and breathed. When he finished, he set the last page down and looked at her. "Miss Harper," he said, "these records establish a clear prior appropriation basis for your Upper Creek access going back to 1880. If the Consolidated Land Company or any subsequent buyer of the Henderson water rights attempts to restrict your access, these documents give you standing to challenge that restriction through federal court." She had known this was coming. She had believed it was coming. She had ridden 4 days in the rain on the strength of that belief. And still, when Hartley said it out loud in his precise bureaucratic voice, she felt something give way in her chest, something that had been braced for so long that the release of it was almost physically painful. "How long will the filing process take?" she asked. "I can have a preliminary filing recorded within 30 days, he said. "Full confirmation within 90. In the meantime," he looked at his records clerk, "we can issue a provisional notice of claim that would complicate any competing purchase significantly." "Yes," she said. "Please," he nodded. He picked up his pen. "You put this together yourself?" "Yes. In the middle of a disputed property situation, and I assume considerable local opposition." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. "Then you've done the hard part already," he said, and returned to his paperwork. She walked out of that building into the Denver afternoon and stood on the boardwalk and looked at the street and let the relief move through her completely, all at once, without holding any of it back. She had earned this, every cold morning taking measurements, every careful entry in her log, every day she had stayed when it would have been easier to go. She sent a telegram to the trading post at the foot of the Ridgeline Trail, addressed to Caleb Whitaker. It said filed. Coming back Thursday, both creeks holding. She didn't know if he would receive it. She sent it anyway. She made better time going home than coming. The weather cleared. August found his stride. She pushed harder than she probably should have, and arrived at the gate of her property Wednesday evening, a full day early, still mounted, with dust on her coat and the oilskin sleeve empty and the provisional notice of claim signed and sealed in its place. Caleb was at the paddock fence. He turned when he heard August on the trail, and he looked at her the way a person looks when they've been keeping a private count of the days and have not admitted it to themselves. "A day roads," she said. She dismounted. August was tired, and so was she. But the tiredness felt different from the kind she'd ridden out with. This was the tiredness of something finished, something accomplished, something real. "Henderson," she said. "Held off," Caleb said. "I told him I was managing your property while you filed a federal claim. He didn't sign with Pruitt's man. A pause. He wanted to know why I was involved. What did you tell him? Told him I had a stake in how this valley treats its residents. He looked at her steadily. He's not a bad man. He's scared. Scared men need something to hold on to. Did he hold on? He's holding. Another pause. For now. She nodded. She led August toward the barn. Caleb fell in beside her. December's hoof? She better. 3 days of the mash. She only tried to fake me out once. Something warm moved through her. She likes you. Animals are good judges, he said. You said that before. Still true. They were at the barn door. She stopped. She was tired and dusty, and her back ached from 6 days of hard riding. And she was also, for the first time in 14 months, standing on ground that was legally documented as hers all the way to the federal level, and not a single person in Harlan Creek could take that away from her now. She turned. Caleb was standing at the barn door and looking at her, and his face had gone past the usual careful stillness into something she hadn't seen on him before, something exposed, something he hadn't entirely planned on showing. Thank you, she said. She meant it for all of it: the flour and salt on a July road, the fence posts, the conversations at the paddock, the 6 days of caring for her horses while she rode through rain to Denver. She meant it for the Henderson conversation, and for sleeping in her barn like a hired hand to protect her reputation, and for saying "I'll be here" like it was a promise and keeping it. She meant it for asking what really happened before he believed anything else. He looked at her for a moment. You did the hard part, he said. The same thing Hartley had said, and coming from Caleb it meant something different and something more. We're not finished, she said. Pruitt isn't done. No, he agreed. He isn't. We'll deal with it, Caleb said. You're not doing it alone. She looked at him. You're not doing it alone. 7 words, the most ordinary words in the world. The kind of thing people said all the time and meant for a week and then forgot. But Caleb Whitaker was not the kind of man who said things he didn't mean. And she had watched him for weeks now, and she knew that about him the same way she knew December's gait or the weather pattern off the North Ridge from careful attention over time. From watching and listening and trusting what she observed over what she'd been told. She believed him. That was the moment right there. Standing at the barn door with August blowing tired air behind her and December's head appearing over the paddock rail to register her return, that was the moment she felt it shift from something unnamed into something she would have to eventually give a name to. Not yet. She wasn't ready. But it was there. Your stuff is still in the barn, she said. There's no reason to rush back up the trail tonight. He looked at her. You sure? You're hired help, she said, keeping her voice level. Hired help doesn't ride out after dark. His expression did the thing, the almost smile, the compression of larger into something small and contained and real. Fair enough, he said. I'll start on breakfast. She led August into the barn and unsaddled him and brushed him down and felt the property settle around her in the evening quiet, the horses, the creek, the fence that ran straight on all 4 sides, the provisional claim signed and filed in Denver. And somewhere behind her, she heard Caleb moving toward the fire pit with the easy familiarity of a man who had learned, in her absence, where everything was kept. Like a man who had made himself useful without making himself at home, but who had learned the difference between the two things well enough to know which direction he was moving. She pressed her forehead against August's neck for a moment. Then she went to help with the fire. Wade Pruitt arrived on a Friday. Evelyn knew he was coming before she saw him. She knew it the way she knew weather, not from any single sign, but from the accumulation of small things that didn't quite fit. Gerald Calloway had sent a boy up the trail the day before with a message that said only, "Company coming." Be ready. Jack Henderson had ridden past her gate that morning without stopping, which he never did, eyes forward, jaw tight, the posture of a man who had already made a decision and didn't want to look at the person it would cost. She was at the paddock when the riders came up the trail. 3 of them. Pruitt in the center on a black horse that was too fine for the terrain, the kind of horse a man bought to be seen on rather than to work with. A lawyer type on his left, young neat leather satchel across the saddle horn. A third man on the right who wore his gun low and didn't look at the scenery. Caleb was in the barn. She had not told him to stay there. She had not told him anything, but she heard the sound of his work stop when the riders came through the gate, and she was glad of the silence that followed, because it meant he was listening and not moving, and that was exactly right. Pruitt pulled up 10 feet from her and did not dismount. That told her everything about how he intended to run this conversation. "Miss Harper," he said. He had a broad, weathered face and small, pale eyes and the particular smoothness of a man who had delivered bad news so many times it no longer troubled him. "Wade Pruitt. I believe you know who I am. I know who you are," she said. She did not move toward him. She did not take her hands out of her coat pockets. She stood at the paddock rail and looked at him with the same steady patience she used on difficult horses, not aggressive, not retreating, just present and immovable. "Then you know I'm not a man who makes unnecessary trips," he said. "I've come to make you a fair offer on this property." "This property isn't for sale." He smiled. It didn't reach those pale eyes. "Mr. Harper, I think if you look at your situation clearly, you'll find that it's in your interest to hear the number before you decide that." "I've heard your numbers," she said. "I know what you paid the Keller family for their 300 acres. I know what you paid the Reinhardts. Fair isn't a word I'd use for either of those transactions." The lawyer on his left shifted in his saddle. Pruitt's smile didn't change. "Those were negotiated in good faith. Those were negotiated with families who were frightened and running short on options," she said. "I'm neither." Pruitt looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the property, the barn, the paddock, the fence that ran straight on all 4 sides, the kitchen garden along the east wall. He was calculating. She could see it happening behind his eyes. "You filed a federal water claim last week," he said. She had expected this. He had people in Denver, or people who knew people in Denver. "Of course he did. I did," she said. "Provisional claims get contested all the time," he said. "Especially when the prior appropriation basis is disputed. That kind of legal process can take years. Expensive years." He let that sit for a moment. "I'm offering you a way out of that uncertainty. I don't experience certainty the way you do, Mr. Pruitt," she said. "I've been uncertain for 14 months and I'm still here. You'll have to do better than the threat of a long legal process." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Men like Pruitt didn't get angry in front of people they were trying to buy. But the smoothness thinned slightly, the way ice thins when the temperature rises, and she saw beneath it the harder thing. "The Henderson water rights," he said. "Jack Henderson signed this morning." She felt it, the floor dropping, fast and sudden, the specific sick lurch of hearing the worst thing you'd been bracing for. She had known Henderson was frightened. She had known his wife's medical costs were serious. She had told herself he might hold. He had not held. She kept her face where it was. "That's between you and Henderson." "It is," Pruitt agreed. "And now it's between you and me. Because without Upper Creek access through the Henderson property, your summer pasture is dust by August 15th. Your kitchen garden fails. Your horses start losing weight in September. By November, you're looking at a very hard winter with very few options." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "I'm prepared to offer you $3,000 for the property as it stands." That's generous, given the circumstances. $3,000. For a property worth twice that in any honest assessment, and a water claim that was worth more than either. She looked at the document in his hand. She didn't take it. "Get off my land," she said. The third man, the one with the low gun, straightened slightly in his saddle. Pruitt didn't move. "Miss Harper, I said get off my land." Her voice was the same temperature it had been since he arrived, not hot, not shaking, just steady and absolute. "You've made your offer. I've declined it. This conversation is over." Pruitt looked at her for a long moment. He was reassessing her. She could feel it recalculating the kind of woman she was, the kind of resistance she was likely to mount, whether she was bluffing about the water claim or genuinely believed in it. "The offer expires in 1 week," he said. "After that, I'll let the legal process play out. And legal processes have a way of being very hard on people who don't have resources." He turned his horse. The lawyer followed. The third man, the one with the gun, looked at her for 1 extra second before he turned, and it was the kind of look she was meant to feel as a warning, and she did, and she filed it. They rode out through the gate. She stood at the paddock rail and breathed. December came to the fence and pressed against her shoulder, solid and warm. She heard Caleb come out of the barn. He didn't say anything. He came and stood beside her at the fence and looked at the trail where the 3 riders had disappeared. And the silence between them was the particular kind that exists when 2 people have just witnessed the same serious thing and are both sitting with the weight of it before either speaks. "Henderson signed," she said. "I heard this morning." "I know." A pause. "I should have pushed harder." "You pushed as hard as you could without threatening the man," she said. "It wasn't enough, because it was never going to be enough. He has a sick wife and Pruitt has money, and that equation doesn't resolve in our favor, whatever we say." Our favor. She heard herself say it and didn't take it back. "The federal claim is provisional," she said. "Pruitt knows that. It gives me standing to contest, but contesting takes time and time takes money, and I have enough money to last through spring, and then I need the property to be earning." She was thinking out loud now, working through it the way she worked through a problem, with a difficult horse, not against it, with it, following the logic of the resistance until she found the place where it gave. He cuts the creek access. By August 15th the pasture goes dry. "I can water the horses from the well through summer, but the well's not deep enough to sustain the garden, too. By fall I'm choosing between the horses and the food." "By winter stop," Caleb said. She stopped. "Don't run the whole thing to the end," he said. He turned to face her. "One problem at a time. The creek's the critical one." "The creek's already lost." "Maybe not." He looked at the trail again, and she could see him thinking, not the surface kind of thinking, but the deep, slow kind that came from years of solving practical problems in remote terrain with limited resources and no one to ask for help. "The Henderson property borders yours along the North Ridge. His water rights are for the lower diversion, the agricultural channel he uses for his field. They don't necessarily include the upper tributary where it crosses the ridge." She looked at him. "Pruitt's lawyers will argue they do." "Pruitt's lawyers will argue anything he pays them to argue," Caleb said. "But if the upper tributary is a separate water source from Henderson's agricultural diversion, and your federal claim documents it as such, then Henderson's sale doesn't touch it." He looked at her. "Your records. The 3 years of measurements. Did you document the upper tributary separately from the lower channel?" She thought. She ran back through 3 years of notes in her head, the specific language she had used for each data point, the dates, the measurements. "Yes," she said slowly. "I logged them separately because the flow patterns are different. The upper tributary runs from snowmelt. It behaves differently from the agricultural channel, which is fed by the lower springs. Then they're documented as distinct water sources. In my records. Pruitt's lawyers will argue they're hydrologically connected." "Are they?" She thought about it. Honestly, rigorously, the way she thought about everything that mattered. "There's a shared aquifer at depth," she said, "but the surface courses are separate. Different drainage patterns. Different seasonal behavior." "Who would know that?" Caleb said. "Officially. Someone with standing in a federal proceeding." She looked at him. The pieces were moving in her mind, assembling themselves into something she hadn't quite seen before. "A hydrological surveyor," she said. "Someone with credentials recognized by the Territorial Water Authority." "The Territorial Water Authority," Caleb said carefully, "that just received your documentation from a woman who keeps 3 years of meticulous records." Hartley, she said. The man in Denver, with the precise mustache, who had read her records page by page and said, "You've done the hard part already." He wasn't dismissive. He actually read it. Would he authorize a survey? If there's a basis for one in the documentation, she stopped. It would take weeks. You have a week before Pruitt's offer expires. What happens if you don't accept? He said he'd let the legal process play out. Which means he'd need to contest your claim. And to contest it, he needs to go through the federal office. And if the federal office has already been asked to review the hydrology, Caleb looked at her. He'd be walking into a proceeding that's already underway, she said. He'd have to respond to the survey findings, not just assert his position. It doesn't stop him, Caleb said. He has money and he has lawyers. No, she agreed, it doesn't stop him. But it changes the terrain. It moves the fight onto ground where my records are the foundation instead of something to be dismissed. She stood at the fence and felt the shape of it, not a solution, not safety, but a path. A direction. Something to do other than wait for the winter she'd been calculating. I need to send another telegram to Denver, she said. The trading post will be open tomorrow morning, Caleb said. I'll go tonight. He looked at her. The trail's not safe after dark. I've ridden it in worse conditions, Evelyn. He said her name the way he did when he meant her to actually hear him. One night won't change Pruitt's timeline. Go in the morning. Sleep first. She looked at him. She was wired through with the specific electricity of a person who has just been threatened and has just found a response and wants to move immediately, because moving is the only thing that feels like control. And she knew, watching him watch her, that he understood exactly that feeling, had probably felt it himself more times than she'd want to count, and was not dismissing it. Was just asking her to be practical. Morning, she said. Morning, he confirmed. She didn't sleep well. She lay in the cabin and ran the hydrology through her mind, the upper tributary, the lower channel, the aquifer depth, the seasonal patterns. She ran the legal logic. She ran Pruitt's next move, and his move after that, and the counter to each one. She ran the money, carefully, the way she always ran the money, with the particular precision of a woman who had no margin for error. Sometime past midnight, she heard December moving in the paddock. Restless. Horses picked up human anxiety the way they picked up weather before it arrived, through some channel that wasn't quite sound or smell, but was more intimate than either. She got up and went to the window and looked out. Caleb was at the paddock fence. He'd heard December too. He was talking to the mare in the low, continuous murmur she'd learned to recognize, not words exactly, or not words you could hear from a distance, just sound and rhythm and the physical fact of presence. December settled. He did that. That was the thing about him that she had stopped being surprised by and had started simply accepting. He noticed what needed attending, and he attended it, without announcement, without expectation of recognition. He fixed fences. He carried supplies. He slept in a barn to protect her reputation. He stood at a paddock fence in the middle of the night, talking a restless horse back to calm. She watched him for a moment. Then she went back to bed. She slept. The telegram she sent to Hartley in Denver the next morning was 4 sentences long. She asked whether the provisional claim documentation was sufficient to request a hydrological survey of the upper tributary. She described the Henderson sale and Pruitt's offer. She asked how quickly a survey review could be initiated. Hartley's response came back in 2 hours, which told her he was either at his desk or had left instructions to flag anything from her file. Documentation sufficient. Survey request submitted this morning pending review. Preliminary findings expected 14 days. Do not accept any offer pending federal review. Hartley, she read it twice. She handed it to Caleb across the trading post counter. He read it. He handed it back. He didn't say anything for a moment. He submitted it this morning, she said, before I even asked. He read your records, Caleb said. He read them and he believed them. Yes. She folded the telegram carefully and put it in her coat pocket beside the provisional claim notice. 2 pieces of paper. Between them, enough to change the shape of what was possible. 14 days, she said. And Pruitt's offer expires in 7.
Yes.
So when the week's up and you don't sign. He moves to contest, she said, and walks into a federal review that's already underway. She looked at the telegram in her pocket. He'll know about the survey request within a day or 2. He has people watching the federal office. What does he do when he finds out? She thought about it. What did a man like Pruitt do when the terrain shifted beneath him? He didn't stop. Men like Pruitt never stopped, because stopping meant the investment was lost, and lost investments were the only thing that actually frightened them. He escalated. He found another angle. He applied pressure somewhere softer. He looks for another way in, she said. Not the water. Something else. What else does he have? She didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about the third man, the one with the low gun, who had given her that extra look as they rode out. She was thinking about what it meant that Pruitt had brought that man to what was supposed to be a business conversation. He'll look for something to use against my credibility, she said. The trial. Dunmore. He'll try to get it in front of the federal review as a character question. Caleb's jaw did the thing. He can't introduce the Dunmore verdict in a water rights proceeding. Not formally, but he can make sure the story is circulating in Denver when the surveyor arrives. He can make sure the surveyor has heard the name Evelyn Harper before he reads my records. She looked at Caleb. It worked in county court. Why wouldn't he try it federally? Caleb was quiet. He was working through it. She could tell, not dismissing it, not reassuring her it wouldn't happen, just thinking about whether it was true and what to do if it was. She valued that about him. She had valued it from the beginning, without knowing quite how much. Your records stand on their own, he said finally. The measurements are the measurements. Nobody can look at 3 years of creek level data and say it's dishonest because of what happened in a county courthouse over something unrelated. Hartley can't, she said. A surveyor with scientific training can't. But a federal judge who's heard the story. Then we make sure the story he hears is yours, Caleb said. She looked at him. Dunmore, he said. The actual truth of what happened. Not the Harlan Creek version. Your version, with your documentation. The original water records you paired for his case. Do you still have them? She stared at him. Yes, I kept everything. Then their evidence. Not of the Dunmore case of who you are. Of what kind of person produces 3 years of meticulous creek records. Of the pattern of your work. He was leaning on this trading post counter now, not with his usual easy stillness, but with a forward intensity she hadn't seen from him before. You didn't just accidentally keep good records for yourself. You kept them for Dunmore first. You kept them because that's how you work. That's who you are. And if Pruitt tries to use the Dunmore story as a character question, you answer it with the original records and let people draw their own conclusions. She stood at the counter and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, not relief, not hope exactly, but the specific sensation of being fully seen. Not the version of herself that the town had decided on, not the convenient story that a frightened banker had told his wife, not the woman Calloway refused to serve. The actual version. The one who measured creek levels at dawn, because she understood that water was survival and survival required attention, and attention was something she had always been willing to give. You think it'll work, she said. I think it gives you a fighting chance, he said. I think it's better than waiting for Pruitt to set the terms. She nodded slowly. She looked at the counter for a moment. Then she looked up at him. I'm going to need to go back to Denver, she said. I know. With the Dunmore records, I need to get them in front of Hartley before the survey results come in. Before Pruitt's people can shape the narrative. When do you want to leave? Tomorrow morning. He nodded once. I'll handle the horses. No hesitation. No negotiation. Just I'll handle the horses, the same way he said I'll be here, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it was not the 10th or 11th time he had rearranged his life to make space for hers. Caleb, she said. He looked at her. She had a dozen things that wanted to be said. She had been carrying them for weeks since the first time he'd come back, since the fence, since the coffee in the dark before she rode to Denver, since midnight and December at the paddock fence. She had been holding all of it carefully, at arm's length, because she had learned what happened when you trusted the wrong person, and she was not ready to be wrong again. But she looked at him across the trading post counter, this man who had bought her flour on a road and had not left, and she thought, he has not once asked you for anything. Not once. Thank you, she said, just that. The same thing she'd said before. But this time she meant something bigger by it, and they both knew it. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his face, something real and contained and very carefully held. Don't thank me yet, he said. Let's win first. She was packed by nightfall and gone before dawn. The second ride to Denver was faster. August knew the route now, and the weather held, and she pushed, not recklessly but steadily, the way a person pushes when they know exactly what they're riding toward. She arrived at Hartley's office on the fourth day. He was not surprised to see her. He had the survey request files already open on his desk. I expected you'd come back, he said. Sit down. She sat. She put the Dunmore records on his desk, all of them, the original water measurements, the correspondence logs she had kept of every communication with Franklin Dunmore, the timeline of the case, the final verdict. I need you to read these, she said, before the survey results come in. Before anyone tells you a story about who I am. Hartley looked at the stack of documents. Then he looked at her. Someone's already been in contact, he said. A representative of the Consolidated Land Company, 2 days ago. He brought a letter from a county judge in Harlan Creek. Evelyn felt the cold move through her again. Pruitt had moved faster than she'd anticipated. What did the letter say? It questioned the reliability of your documentation based on a prior verdict regarding your character. And Hartley picked up his pen. And I told the representative that character assessments from county proceedings have no standing in a federal water rights review, and that he was welcome to submit a formal objection in writing which would be reviewed on its merits. He looked at her. I also told him that the documentation we'd received was the most thorough prior appropriation record this office has processed in 11 years. She looked at him. You defended it. I defended the process, he said. Which the documentation follows correctly. He tapped the Dunmore records she'd brought. But I'll read these, because you brought them, and because I want to understand who I'm working with. She let out a breath she had been holding since the trading post. He read. It took 40 minutes. She sat in the chair across from him and watched him turn pages and did not speak. When he finished, he set the last page down. He was quiet for a moment. You built this case for Dunmore. He's yes. And he let the court believe you'd fabricated it. Yes. Hartley looked at her. Miss Harper. This water record and the Dunmore record are identical in methodology. Same measurement intervals. Same level of precision. He paused. You cannot fake methodology. You can fake a number, but you cannot fake 3 years of internally consistent data collected under a single coherent system. Another pause. Whoever told that county court your records were fabricated was either deeply ignorant of hydrology or was lying. She pressed her lips together. The second one, she said. I assumed as much. He picked up his pen again. I'll attach a methodology note to the survey file. The surveyor will see both record sets before he begins his field work. She sat in that chair in Denver and looked at the man across the desk from her, a bureaucrat with a precise gray mustache who believed in process and evidence and the internal consistency of data, and she felt something she had not felt in 14 months. She felt the ground beneath her feet, solid, real. Hers. She thanked him. She stood. She was halfway to the door when he spoke again. Miss Harper. The man Pruitt sent, Hartley said. He wasn't a lawyer. She waited. He introduced himself as a land representative. but he asked questions that a land representative wouldn't ask. About the surveyor's schedule, about which trails access the upper tributary, about how far the Henderson property boundary ran along the ridge. Hartley looked at her steadily. I don't tell you this to frighten you. I tell you because you should know what kind of man you're dealing with. She stood in his doorway and understood. The third man. The one with the low gun. He hadn't come to the business meeting as a warning. He'd come to learn the terrain. Thank you, she said. Her voice was steady. She rode out of Denver that afternoon instead of waiting for morning. She pushed August hard and camped later than she should have, and woke before dawn and pushed again, because she was thinking about Caleb alone at the property with the horses, and no reason to know that Pruitt had sent someone to learn the trails. She was 3 hours from home when she heard the first rider behind her. She didn't turn. She kept August at the same pace and moved her hand to her coat and felt the familiar weight of the rifle in its scabbard, and thought very carefully about what she knew and what she didn't know, and what a smart woman did when she was 3 hours from home, and someone was behind her on a mountain trail. She turned off the main trail at the second pine grove. The rider behind her did the same. She turned August around. Her rifle was in her hand. She sat her horse in the middle of the trail and waited. The rider came around the bend and pulled up hard when he saw her. It was not the man with the low gun. It was Jack Henderson. His horse was blowing like he'd been riding fast for a long time. His face was the color of old ash, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had done something he couldn't undo and was trying to figure out whether there was anything left to do about it. Miss Harper, he said. His voice cracked on the second word. I need to tell you something. She kept the rifle where it was. Talk. Pruitt's man, he said. The one I signed the water rights over to. He came back last night. He asked about your property. About the upper trail to your place. About whether you had a man staying with you. She felt every nerve in her body go sharp. What did you tell him? Henderson looked like he might be sick. I told him you had a hired hand. I didn't know. I thought it was just business questions. But then this morning I heard from my neighbor that 2 men left Harlan Creek before dawn heading north, and they weren't carrying surveying equipment. He swallowed. Miss Harper, for all of it. For signing. For I should have held on longer. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about 14 months of loneliness and a water claim and a man sleeping in her barn to protect her reputation. How far ahead are they, she said. Maybe less. She turned August back toward the trail. Miss Harper Henderson started. Go home to your wife, she said, and if anyone asks where you saw me, you didn't. She pushed August into a run. 2 hours. 2 men. And Caleb alone at the property with no reason to expect anything but a normal morning. She rode. She rode August harder than she had ever ridden any horse in her life. Not recklessly, she was not a reckless woman, but with the particular focus of someone who has done the math and knows exactly how much margin she has and intends to use every inch of it. The trail climbed. August's breath came in hard rhythmic bursts beneath her. She kept her weight forward and her eyes on the path, and did not let herself think about what she might find when she got there, because thinking about it would slow her down, and slowing down was the one thing she could not afford. 2 men before dawn, not carrying surveying equipment. She knew what that meant. She had known it the moment Henderson said it on the trail. Pruitt was not a man who accepted a changed terrain without trying to change it back. And when legal pressure didn't move a woman fast enough, men like Pruitt found other kinds of pressure. She came over the last ridge at a full gallop and pulled August up hard at the tree line above her property and sat her horse and looked. The gate was open, not broken open, the way it looked when someone had come through recently and not bothered to close it behind them. Caleb's bay was tied at the paddock fence. That meant he was here. That meant he hadn't seen them coming, or had seen them and stayed. She heard voices. She dismounted and tied August to a branch and moved on foot, her rifle in both hands, using the noise of the wind in the pines to cover her approach. There were two of them, like Henderson had said. One was the man with the low gun from Pruitt's original visit. The other was broader, older, with the kind of face that didn't express much of anything. They were standing in the yard between the barn and the paddock. Caleb was standing 10 feet from them. He was not holding a weapon. She stopped. She watched. Mr. Whitaker, the man with the low gun, was saying. His voice was conversational, almost friendly, the way a voice got when the person using it wanted you to understand that friendliness was a choice they were currently making and could unchoose at any moment. We're not here to cause trouble. Mr. Pruitt simply wanted us to remind Miss Harper that his offer has a deadline and that the timeline might benefit from being moved forward. Miss Harper's not here, Caleb said. His voice was the same as always, level, unhurried, carrying no information about what he was thinking underneath it. We can wait. The property doesn't receive visitors without invitation, Caleb said. I'll need you to ride back out the gate. The broader man shifted his weight. The man with the low gun smiled. See, now that's the thing, he said. We didn't really come here for an invitation. We came here to have a conversation. And the conversation is going to happen, one way or another. Then you can have it with Miss Harper when she returns, Caleb said. In the meantime, you're trespassing on private property, and I'm asking you politely to leave. Politely, the man said, tasting the word. That's real civilized of you. Evelyn moved. She came around the corner of the barn with the rifle at her shoulder and her eye on the line, and her voice as steady as she could make it. Get off my property. Both men turned. The broader one went very still in the way that meant he was calculating. The man with the low gun did not go still. He turned with a kind of loose readiness that told her he had been in situations like this before and was not frightened of them. But he looked at the rifle, and he looked at the woman holding it, who was not shaking and was not bluffing, and he made a calculation. Miss Harper, he said, we're just here to talk. You came before dawn without announcing yourselves to a private property, she said. That's not a conversation. That's a threat. And I'm done receiving threats. She kept the rifle exactly where it was. You have 30 seconds to be through that gate. A pause. The broad man looked at the man with the gun. The man with the gun looked at Evelyn. He looked at Caleb, who had moved. She noticed this. Noticed it precisely to a position that put him between the two men and the barn door. Not dramatically, just quietly. The way a person moves, when they are making sure that if something happens, they are where they need to be. Mr. Pruitt won't be pleased, the man with the gun said. Mr. Pruitt can come speak to me himself, she said. With advance notice, and without the company. Another pause. Then the man with the gun tilted his head, slightly acknowledgement, not quite surrender, and touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of courtesy, and the two of them walked to their horses and rode through the gate. Evelyn kept the rifle up until they were out of sight around the bend. Then she lowered it. Her arms were shaking. She hadn't noticed while it was happening, which was how these things worked. The body saved the shaking for afterward, when it was safe to feel it. Caleb was beside her. He didn't reach for the rifle or try to take it. He just stood close enough that she could feel the solid fact of him. You all right? He said. Yes. She wasn't entirely, but she would be, and the distinction mattered. You? Fine. How'd you get back so fast? Henderson met me on the trail. She lowered the rifle fully. Her heart was still running hard. He saw them leave. He came after me. She paused. He's sorry for all of it. Caleb was quiet a moment. That took something, he said. Riding after you. She could be fair about that, even now. She walked to the paddock rail. December came immediately, pressed her nose hard against Evelyn's shoulder, snorted once. Horses always knew. She put her hand on the mare's face and breathed. They'll come back, she said. Yes, Caleb said. Or Pruitt finds another way. Yes. She turned around. I'm not leaving. I want you to know that. Whatever he does next, whatever comes next, I'm not leaving this property. He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I never thought you were. I just needed to say it. I know that too." She looked at him. He was watching her with that steady gray attention that she had stopped finding unsettling weeks ago and had started finding something else. Something she was not going to name, standing in her yard with shaking arms and a rifle in her hand. "I need coffee," she said. "I made a pot an hour ago," he said. "It's probably still warm." It was still warm. They drank it in the kitchen, which was the first time they had sat inside together. She realized all the coffee they had been at the paddock fence, or on the porch, or standing in the yard. The inside of the cabin felt different with another person in it. Fuller, less quiet in the way that empty houses were quiet. She told him everything about Denver. Hartley, the Consolidated Land Company representative. The methodology note. The surveyor. She told him what Hartley had said about the questions Pruitt's man had been asking, and she watched Caleb's face go through several things as she talked: concern, calculation, and a kind of anger that was cold and controlled, and nothing like the hot kind. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He was scoping the property, he said. "Not just the water. The whole property." "Yes, which means he's not just trying to pressure you into selling. He's planning for what happens if you don't." She had thought this on the ride home. She had turned it over and over. What does a man like Pruitt do when a legal approach fails and a pressure approach fails? "He looks for a legal technicality," Caleb said. "Something in the original property filing. Something in the water claim that can be challenged. Something that looks like process but is really just finding a crack and prying it open." She put her coffee cup down. "My property filing is solid. I had a lawyer in Denver look it over when I bought it. The water claim is newer. It's provisional," Hartley said. "Hartley is careful," Caleb said, "and he's on your side as much as a federal official can be. But a federal review takes time, and Pruitt has money to spend on lawyers who know how to make time work against someone." He looked at her. "What's the weakest point in your claim?" She thought about it. Honestly, the way she always thought about things that mattered. "The point of diversion," she said. "The specific location where I draw from the upper tributary. It's within 100 feet of the Henderson boundary. If Pruitt's lawyers argue the draw point is technically on Henderson's side of the line." "Is it?" "No. I surveyed it myself when I bought the property. The draw point is on my side by 30 feet. She paused. "But I surveyed it myself, my measurements, my tools, my records, which are meticulous and internally consistent," Caleb said. As Hartley already noted, which a hired surveyor working for Pruitt could dispute. Caleb was quiet. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. She watched him think. "I need an independent survey," she said. "Before Pruitt's people do one. A surveyor with no connection to Harlan Creek or to Pruitt's operation who can put their name on the boundary measurement." "Do you know anyone?" she thought. She thought about the network of people she had known before Harlan Creek, the colleagues, the professionals, the people she had worked with in Denver, before she had bought this land and moved away from the city to build something quieter. She had cut most of those ties. It had seemed cleaner, after the trial, to start over completely. She had not completely started over, though. Not entirely. "There's a man named Silas Beaumont," she said slowly. "He's a surveyor, licensed through the Territorial Authority. He taught a land measurement course in Denver that I attended 4 years ago. He testified in a federal water case in '81. His work is respected. Would he come? I haven't spoken to him in 3 years. But he knew me before the trial, before the Dunmore story." She paused. "He's the kind of man who would want to know if something unjust was happening." "Then send him a telegram," Caleb said. "Tonight? Can you reach the trading post before it closes?" She checked the light. "If I leave now." He stood up. "I'll saddle August." She looked at him across the kitchen table. At this man who had come in from the cold of his own solitude and had chosen, without drama and without announcement, to make her problems his problems. Who had slept in her barn and held her difficult horses and talked to Henderson and stood in her yard without a weapon while two of Pruitt's men made threats. "Caleb," she said. He stopped. "Why are you still here?" she said. Not unkindly, not as an accusation, as a genuine question asked plainly, because she was a person who asked things plainly when they mattered. "You have a ranch, cattle, a life on that mountain. This isn't your fight." He stood in the doorway of her kitchen and looked at her for a long time. "No," he said, "it's not." He said it without apology. "But you are." She sat very still. "I don't know exactly when that happened," he said. "I don't have a date for it." But somewhere between the road and the fence posts, and a woman who sleeps in her coat and rides through rain to file federal paperwork, somewhere in there, it stopped being about the fight and started being about. He paused. He was not a man who said a great many words, and when he said them, they were exact, and she felt every one of them. "I'm not asking you for anything. I know what it cost you to trust someone before, and I know I haven't earned that yet, and I'm not standing here expecting anything in return. I just needed you to know why I'm still here, so you could decide what to do with it." Evelyn Harper sat at her kitchen table with her cold coffee and her rifle leaning against the wall and the late afternoon light coming through the window, and she looked at a man who had just said the most honest thing anyone had said to her in longer than she could measure. She stood up. "Go saddle August," she said. He looked at her. "I need to get that telegram to Beaumont before the post closes," she said. "And when I get back, we're going to talk. But right now I need to move." Something moved through his face, something he didn't try to conceal. "All right," he said. She was at the door. She stopped. "Caleb." He looked up from where he'd been reaching for his hat. "I know why you're here," she said quietly. "I've known for a while. I just needed to hear you say it." She went out before he could answer. Beaumont's telegram response came the following morning. 3 lines. "I remember your work. I've heard the Dunmore story. I'll come." He would arrive in Harlan Creek in 5 days. He would bring his equipment and his license documentation, and he would conduct an independent boundary and water source survey with no connection to any party other than the territorial authority. She read it at the trading post counter, and her hands were steady, and her eyes were dry, and she was glad no one was watching, because she was not entirely sure she would have stayed in control if someone had been. She rode home and told Caleb. He read the telegram. He handed it back, he said, "before Pruitt's offer expires. He'll know Beaumont is coming. He has people watching the telegraph." "Yes," she said, "which means he'll move before the survey. He'll file the counter-challenge before Beaumont can put his name on anything." "Then we need something he can't counter-challenge," Caleb said. She looked at him. "Henderson," Caleb said. "He came after you on the trail. He's sorry. You said it yourself, it took something." "Henderson signed over the water rights. Being sorry doesn't unsign them." "No, but he might be willing to sign something else." Caleb looked at her. "An affidavit, stating that he was under financial duress when he signed Pruitt's contract. Stating that Pruitt's representative used his wife's illness as leverage. If Henderson puts that in writing and it goes to Hartley, it complicates Pruitt's purchase," she said, following it. "Not legally void, but complicates. And if Henderson is willing to grant you an easement voluntary, in writing for the upper tributary access, even just a seasonal one, then your drawpoint isn't disputed regardless of what Pruitt's surveyors say about the boundary." She stared at him. "You think Henderson would do that?" "I think Henderson rode hard to warn you, because he's a man who knows he did something wrong and is looking for a way to make it right. And I think if someone asks him directly, clearly, without making him feel like a coward for what he did." "You," she said. "You're saying you should ask him." "I know how to talk to scared men," Caleb said quietly. "I've been one." She looked at him. She thought about a winter in 1876, and a man who had ridden up to a mountain with his grief and his cattle and built a cabin and stayed because staying was the only honest thing left to do. She thought about what it took to come back from that kind of cold. She thought about the fact that he had come back and had ended up on a road in July where a woman was standing with an empty bag and had stopped. "Go talk to Henderson," she said. He came back in the late afternoon. She was in the barn with December when she heard the bay on the trail, and she came out and looked at his face when he dismounted, and she knew before he said a word. "He'll sign both," Caleb said. "The affidavit and the easement." She pressed her lips together. "Hardwin, tomorrow morning. He wants to bring his wife. He said she should hear it." "What really happened?" A pause. "He also said he wanted me to tell you directly that he knows saying sorry isn't enough. But he's saying it anyway." She turned. She walked back into the barn. She stood with both hands on December's neck and breathed. She heard Caleb come in behind her. He didn't say anything. He just came and stood nearby in the way he did, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room. "I spent 14 months, she said. Her voice was not steady. She let it not be steady, because he had said what he said in her kitchen, and she had said what she said in response, and they had passed some threshold, and on the other side of it she did not have to hold everything completely together all the time. 14 months being the woman who ruined a family. And the whole time, the only thing it would have taken was one person to say what actually happened. "I know," he said, "one person, with enough decency to tell the truth." "I know." She turned around. Her eyes were wet, and she didn't try to make them not be. "I'm not going to cry," she said. "All right," he said. Gently. "I made that rule 14 months ago, and I have kept it this entire time." "You've kept it remarkably well," he said, still gently. She laughed. It came out rough and wet and real, nothing like the contained sound she usually permitted herself, and December startled slightly and then settled. And the laugh cracked something open in Evelyn's chest that she had been keeping locked for a very long time. Caleb reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, not with declaration, just his hand, big and rough and warm, taking hers and holding it with the same steadiness he brought to everything. She looked down at their hands. She looked up at him. "I'm still not ready," she said, "for whatever this is going to be." "I need more time." "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She believed him. She believed him the way she believed the creek measurements and the federal claim and the fact that December had good judgment. From careful observation over time, from watching and listening, from trusting what she could see. "Okay," she said. She did not pull her hand away. The next morning Henderson came with his wife. Martha Henderson was a small woman with a serious face and the particular thinness of someone who had been ill for a long time and was fighting it. She walked slowly, but she walked without being helped, and she sat at Evelyn's kitchen table and looked at Evelyn with eyes that had clearly been doing a lot of thinking. "My husband told me everything," Martha said. Her voice was quiet but direct. "The real version, not the one the town's been telling." Evelyn sat across from her. She did not say it was fine because it wasn't. She did not say it didn't matter because it did. She sat and she listened. "I believed the wrong thing about you," Martha said. "I believed it because I wanted someone to blame and you were there, and it was easier than being angry at Franklin Dunmore, who we all had to keep living next to." She paused. "That wasn't fair." "No," Evelyn said, "it wasn't." "I'm sorry," Martha said plainly. No decoration. Evelyn looked at her. This woman who had been sick for a long time and had still ridden out to sit at a table she wasn't sure of her welcome at and say a thing that cost something. "Thank you," Evelyn said. Jack Henderson signed the affidavit in Caleb's presence. He signed the easement. His hand was not quite steady, but it didn't stop. When he finished, he set the pen down and looked at Evelyn and said, "I hope it helps," in the voice of a man who has set down something heavy. "It'll help," she said. After they rode out, she took both documents and sat at her table and read every word. The affidavit was detailed, specific, and damning. Pruitt's representative had come to Henderson twice. The first time to make an offer. The second time to describe in careful terms what would happen to the Henderson property's access to the lower county road if Henderson chose not to cooperate. Road access that Pruitt had 3 months earlier quietly purchased a right-of-way on through a third party. It wasn't just leverage, it was coordinated, planned. The kind of thing that took time and money and the calculated intention to make sure every exit was covered before you knocked on the door. "He's been planning this longer than we knew," she said. Caleb read over her shoulder. "A year at least," he said. "Maybe longer. He was building position before he ever came to you." "He came to me last," she said, "which means I was the target the whole time. The Henderson water rights, the road access, those were all to get to me." She sat with that for a moment, the particular weight of being the final piece in someone else's plan. "Why?" Caleb said, not asking her to answer, asking the question that needed to be in the room. "The Upper Creek," she said. "It's not just about my property. The upper tributary flows from the same snowmelt source that feeds 3 other properties downstream. Whoever controls the point of origin controls the water. Pruitt's been buying downstream and working upstream. My property sits at the headwater." She looked at the documents. "He doesn't want my land. He wants what's on it, and through it." "The whole valley," Caleb said. "The whole valley," she agreed. She looked at the documents for a long moment. Then she stood up. "I need to send these to Hartley," she said, "before Beaumont arrives. Before Pruitt files his counter-challenge. If Hartley has the affidavit and the easement in hand when the survey comes in, Pruitt's legal approach collapses at the foundation." "That's a 3-day ride," Caleb said. "I know." She looked at him. "I know I keep asking you to hold things here. You're not asking," he said. "I'm offering." He stood. "But this time I want you to take December." She looked at him. "August is the better traveling horse." "August is steadier over long days," he agreed. "But December is faster when it counts." "And if Pruitt's man is watching the trails," he didn't finish. She looked at the mare in the paddock, December, who was fast and smart, and had known Caleb almost as long as she had, who had stood at the south fence every morning waiting. "All right," she said. She was packed within the hour. At the gate, Caleb checked December's girth without being asked. He checked the rifle in the scabbard. He handed her the oilskin with the documents already wrapped inside, dry and protected. She looked down at him. 3 days, she said. "I'll be here," he said. The same words, the same weight. She had lost count of how many times he had said them and meant them, and not once had it felt ordinary. She reached down. She put her hand on his face just for a moment, just her palm against his jaw, and felt him go completely still beneath it. Not in surprise, but in the particular stillness of a person receiving something they had been hoping for and had not let themselves expect. "I'll be back," she said. "I know," he said. She rode out. December moved like water under her, fast and smooth, and the trail opened ahead, and the mountains rimmed the sky, and the documents in the oilskin were the most important thing she had ever carried, and she rode with them like they were. She was 2 miles out when she heard the second horse. Not behind her this time. Ahead. She pulled December up and her hand went to the rifle, and she sat her horse on the trail and listened and waited. And the figure came around the bend riding hard, and it was not Pruitt's man, not the broad man, not anyone she recognized at first. It was a young woman, riding alone, hard and fast with dust on her coat and her face white and tight with something urgent. She pulled up when she saw Evelyn. "You're Harper," she said. Breathless. "Evelyn Harper. I'm Clara Beaumont," she said. "Silas's daughter. He sent me ahead." She was catching her breath. "My father left Denver 2 days ago. He got as far as the junction at Millhaven before Pruitt's men stopped him on the road." Evelyn felt the cold again. The specific cold stopped him. "Turned him around," Clara said. "Told him the survey contract was disputed, and he'd be arrested for trespassing on contested property if he continued." She swallowed. Papa wanted to push through. I told him he doesn't have the documentation to prove they're wrong. Not on a road. Not without backup. Evelyn sat December in the middle of the trail and looked at this young woman who had ridden hard and fast to bring her the news. And she felt the whole shape of it shift again the way it had been shifting since Pruitt arrived with his smooth face, and his lawyer, and his man with the low gun. Always one step ahead. Always finding the next pressure point before she'd finished responding to the last one. She made a decision. "Ride with me," she said to Clara Beaumont. "I'm going to Denver, and when we get there, your father's going to get his documentation in order and go back with a federal escort, or he's not going at all." Clara looked at her, young, serious, her father's eyes. "That'll take longer than 3 days." "I know," Evelyn said. She thought about Caleb at the property. Caleb who had said, "I'll be here," and had meant it every time. Caleb who had 3 months of summer ranging cattle, and a cabin on a mountain and a life he had put aside without being asked. She thought about his hand taking hers in the barn. She thought about her palm against his jaw at the gate. She pulled December around to face back toward the property. "Wait here," she told Clara. She rode back at a controlled pace, not running, because she needed to think clearly on the way, and she needed to be clear when she got there. Caleb was at the paddock when she came through the gate. He looked at her, at December, at the unchanged oilskin, at her face, and he read all of it in about 3 seconds. "What happened?" he said. "They stopped Beaumont on the road," she said. "Turned him back. I need to go to Denver and come back with federal documentation before he tries again." "How long?" 5 days. He didn't hesitate. "Go." "You're not asking," he said. "I'm telling you to go." He looked at her steadily. "This is the most important ride you've made. Everything, the claim, the affidavit, Beaumont's survey, it all depends on you getting to Hartley with backup." His voice was calm and absolute. "I've got the property. Go." She looked at him. She thought, this is what it looks like. This is what the real thing looks like. Not declarations, not grand gestures. A man standing at a paddock fence saying, "Go," without flinching, because he understands what matters and he's not going to let his own feelings make it smaller. "When I come back," she said. "When you come back," he said. She turned December back toward the gate. "Evelyn." She stopped. She looked back. He was standing at the paddock rail, and the morning light was on him, and he looked like what he was, a man who had built a life out of hard work and solitude, and had found, on a July road, something he had stopped believing he would find, and was holding it with both hands without squeezing. "Ride careful," he said. "Always," she said. She rode through the gate. She did not look back again, not because she didn't want to. Because she knew if she did, she would see him watching, and if she saw him watching, she would not be able to make herself keep going, and she had to keep going. Clara Beaumont was where she'd left her, waiting on the trail with the patience of a woman who had been raised by a careful man. "Denver," Evelyn said, pulling alongside her. "Denver," Clara confirmed. They rode. They rode into Denver on the 4th day, not the 5th. Evelyn had pushed hard, and Clara Beaumont had kept up without complaint, which told Evelyn everything she needed to know about the kind of woman Silas Beaumont had raised. They didn't talk much on the road. They talked the way people talked when they were moving fast toward something urgent, practical, short, necessary. But somewhere past the second night's camp, when the fire was low and the horses were quiet, Clara had said, "Papa told me about your water records." He said he'd never seen documentation like that from a private homesteader. "I learned from him," Evelyn said, "the course he taught." 4 years ago, Clara had looked at her across the fire. "He remembered you," she said, "when your telegram came. He said your name and he said, 'That woman does not cut corners,' and then he started packing." Evelyn had looked at the fire for a long time after that. Hartley was at his desk when they walked in. He looked at Clara, looked at Evelyn, looked at the expression on both their faces, and he did not ask them to wait. "Tell me," he said. Evelyn told him. Pruitt's men on the road. Beaumont turned back. The affidavit from Henderson. The easement. The coordinated purchase of the road SAS 3 months prior. The third man with the low gun, who had visited Hartley's office asking questions about surveyor schedules. Hartley listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for precisely 4 seconds, she counted, and then he opened his desk drawer and produced a form she had not seen before. Federal injunction request, he said. Interference with a federal survey process is a criminal matter, not a civil one. If Pruitt's men physically stopped a licensed surveyor operating under a provisional federal claim order, that's obstruction. He looked at her. I need Silas Beaumont's written account of what happened on that road. He's in Millhaven, Clara said. Waiting. Can you get a telegram to him today? We came straight here, Evelyn said. We haven't stopped. Hartley looked at them, trail-worn. 4 days of hard riding visible in every line of them, and something moved through his precise bureaucratic face that was not quite admiration but was close to it. I'll draft the injunction request this afternoon, he said. If Beaumont's account corroborates yours, I can have it in front of a federal judge by tomorrow morning. He paused. And I'll be requesting a federal marshal escort for the survey party. Evelyn sat in the chair across from him. The word marshal moved through her like something physical, the specific weight of a word that meant this had moved beyond Pruitt's reach, beyond county politics, beyond the particular corruption of small men in small offices who owed their positions to men with money. He'll fight it, she said. He can fight it in federal court, Hartley said, which is a considerably different arena than the county courthouse in Harlan Creek. He picked up his pen. Miss Harper. The Henderson affidavit, did he sign it before a witness? Caleb Whitaker, she said. He manages the Ridgeland cattle operation above Garnet Pass. Known in the valley for the past several years. No connection to Pruitt or to any of the disputed parties. Hartley made a note. Good. He made another note. And the easement properly dated and witnessed. Yes. Then we have obstruction, coercion evidence, a prior appropriation claim with meticulous documentation, a voluntary easement that resolves the boundary question regardless of the survey outcome, and an affidavit establishing that the Henderson water rights sale was executed under duress. He set his pen down and looked at her. Miss Harper, Wade Pruitt has spent a great deal of money building a position that just became very difficult to defend. She looked at him. How long does the injunction take? If the judge concurs, and I believe he will, 24 hours. And the marshal escort for Beaumont? I can have it arranged by tomorrow afternoon. She breathed, slowly, in and out, the way she had learned to breathe when the ground shifted, not fighting it, just staying upright and present until it steadied. I need to send a telegram, she said. The office is 2 doors down, Hartley said. He was already writing. The telegram she sent to the Garnet Pass trading post was 5 words. Injunction filed. Coming home Thursday. She didn't know if he would get it. She sent it anyway, the same way she had sent the first one, because telling him felt necessary even across the distance, even without certainty of receipt. She had stopped pretending that she sent those telegrams for purely practical reasons. She and Clara found rooms at a boarding house, and Evelyn slept for 10 hours without moving. She dreamed about December and the sound of the creek, and the particular quality of the early morning light through the cabin window, and when she woke she lay still for a moment and felt, for the first time in a very long time, something that was not quite peace but was adjacent to it. The federal judge signed the injunction the following morning. Hartley sent a copy to the territorial marshal's office in Harlan Creek. He sent a second copy to the county judge, who had presided over the Dunmore trial, which was not required by process, but which Hartley did with a quiet deliberateness that told Evelyn he had formed a view about that verdict, and was not going to express it directly, but was going to make sure the right people knew what the federal authority had found. Silas Beaumont arrived in Denver that evening. He was a lean man in his 60s with steady hands and the kind of eyes that had spent decades measuring the world and knew exactly how imprecise most human accounts of it were. He embraced his daughter briefly and firmly, and then he turned to Evelyn and looked at her the way he had looked at her students 4 years ago, assessing, direct, without pretense. "You kept the records," he said. "You taught me Wida," she said. He almost smiled. "When tomorrow?" she said. With a marshal. He nodded, like this was a reasonable logistical update and nothing more. She liked him very much. The ride back to Harlan Creek was nothing like any of her previous rides. Silas Beaumont rode on her left, Clara on her right. 2 federal marshals behind them, solid, unremarkable men who wore their badges without drama and carried themselves with the easy authority of people who did not need to announce what they were. She did not feel safe, exactly. She did not think safety was something you felt in the middle of a fight. But she felt grounded. She felt the specific gravity of things moving in the right direction, and after 14 months of things moving consistently in the wrong one, that sensation was almost overwhelming in its ordinariness. They stopped for the night at the junction outside Millhaven. In the morning, before they mounted, Marshal Denton, the senior of the two, a weathered man who spoke in the measured cadences of someone accustomed to making things clear, sat across from her at the campfire and laid out what would happen. "When we arrive," he said, "we'll present the injunction to Pruitt's operation and to the county courthouse. The injunction prohibits any interference with the survey process and requires all parties to maintain existing property access until the federal review is complete." He looked at her steadily. "That means Pruitt cannot act on the Henderson water rights in any way that restricts your access while the proceeding is pending." "He'll have lawyers there," she said. "He can have whoever he likes," Denton said. "The injunction supersedes county authority. His lawyers will know that." She nodded. She looked at the fire. "Miss Harper," Denton said. He was not a man who used names casually, she had noticed. When he used them, he meant to be heard. "What you've assembled here, the records, the affidavit, the easement, the documentation of coordinated interference. Most people in your situation don't have a quarter of this. Most people in your situation give up before they get halfway." He paused. "I've worked federal water cases for 11 years. I know what it takes to get to this point from where you were." Another pause. "I wanted to say that before we rode into whatever's waiting." She looked at him. She thought about the road. She thought about Gerald Calloway's store and the list in her coat pocket and the empty bag and a man on a dark bay horse who had asked her what she needed before he assumed anything. "I had help," she said. "We usually do," Denton said. "The trick is finding the right kind." They came into Harlan Creek on a Thursday morning. She had not been through Main Street in weeks. She had been going around it, through the back trail to the trading post because it was simpler and because she was tired of being a public performance of everyone's discomfort. But there was no back way into town with 2 federal marshals and a licensed surveyor and his daughter, and she was not, in any case, going around anything anymore. She rode December down the center of Main Street. The effect was not dramatic. It was not the way stories sometimes described such moments, no crowds gathering, no one pointing. But the people who were there saw. Margaret Stowe, coming out of the mercantile, saw. 3 men outside the barber shop saw. Gerald Calloway, who was sweeping his front step, saw. He met her eyes. He looked at the marshals. He looked back at her. He gave a single slow nod, not apology, not quite, but acknowledgement. The nod of a man who had made a private calculation and was quietly revising it. She rode past without stopping. They went directly to the county courthouse. Marshal Denton delivered the injunction to the county clerk with the efficiency of a man who had done this before and was not interested in discussion. The clerk read it twice, sent for the county judge. And the county judge, the same man who had presided over the Dunmore verdict, read it with a face that went through several careful expressions before settling on the particular blankness of someone who has just understood that. The ground beneath them has shifted significantly. This supersedes any county-level proceeding, Denton said. I understand that, the judge said, stiffly. Mr. Pruitt's operation will be notified this afternoon, Denton said. Any interference with the survey party or with Miss Harper's property access will result in criminal charges. Understood, the judge said. He did not look at Evelyn. She looked at him. She looked at him with steady eyes and said nothing, because everything that needed to be said was in the documents Denton had just placed on his desk, and she was done needing to say things to people who had already decided not to hear her. They rode up to her property in the early afternoon. She heard December before she saw the gate. The mare under her had gone forward, eager, the way horses went when they were approaching something familiar and good. And she heard, from somewhere above the trail, the sound that she had not let herself think about during 6 days of riding, the particular sound of Caleb working, the rhythm of a man in a task, steady and unhurried. He was mending the section of fence along the east pasture. He heard them on the trail and turned, and she watched him take in the whole picture. December, Clara Beaumont, Silas Beaumont, 2 federal marshals in the same sweeping, unhurried assessment he brought to everything. Then he looked at her face. Whatever he saw there made him set down the fence tool and walk to the gate. You got the injunction, he said. We got the injunction, she said. He opened the gate. December walked through, like she owned the place, which she did, which they both did, which all of this had always been about. Evelyn dismounted, and December turned immediately and pressed her nose hard against Evelyn's shoulder, and she put her arm around the mare's neck and held on for a moment. She heard Caleb introducing himself to Denton, heard Denton explaining the survey timeline, heard Silas Beaumont asking about access to the upper tributary, and Caleb answering with the specific detail of a man who had spent 6 days learning this property from the inside. She let herself hold December a little longer. Then she straightened and turned around. Caleb was looking at her. Denton was looking at a map. Clara was helping Silas with his equipment bags. The marshals were watering their horses at the trough. You got my telegram, she said. Yesterday morning, he said. Injunction filed. I thought you might not got it, he said. Quietly. I read it about 6 times. She looked at him. 6 days was a long time to be apart from something you had not yet admitted you needed. She had ridden 400 miles of it in the space between what she knew and what she was ready to say, and somewhere around the 3rd day the distance between those 2 things had collapsed. And she had spent the last 2 days riding toward the other side of it. December's hoof? Good, he said. She had the bran mashed twice. She's fine. You look tired, she said. So do you. I'm all right, I know, he said. You always are. She looked at him for a long moment. Around them the property moved and breathed the horses, the marshals, Beaumont already walking toward the creek with his equipment. Her land, her creek, her fence running straight and true on all 4 sides. Caleb, she said. Yeah, I've been thinking, she said, about what you said in the kitchen. He waited. He was very good at waiting. You said you didn't know exactly when it happened, she said. When it stopped being about the fight and started being about me. She paused. I do. I know exactly when it happened for me. He looked at her. His face was open in a way it only got when he had decided not to protect it. When was it? On the road, she said. The 1st day. When you wrote down my list. He was quiet. Most men, when they want to help someone, they tell you what you need, she said. They assume. They decide for you. You took out a notebook and wrote down what I told you. Exactly what I told you. She looked at him. That was when. He was very still. I'm not ready for everything, she said. I need time to trust what I feel without second-guessing it. I need to be fair to myself about that. She paused. But I know what I want. And what I want is to stop pretending this is something other than what it is. He reached out. He took her hand, the same way he had in the barn, just his hand taking hers, steady and warm and without performance. "I'll wait as long as you need," he said. "I know," she said. "That's partly why I'm not asking you to." Something moved through his face then, real and uncontrolled, and exactly what it was, and she had the satisfaction of watching him not try to contain it. "Evelyn," he said. "Don't say anything formal," she said. "Not now. There's a federal surveyor 20 yards away." He looked at Beaumont, who was crouched at the creek bank with his instruments and appeared to have noticed nothing. He looked back at her. The almost smile arrived, and stayed this time longer than it ever had before, and she looked at it directly without looking away. "Fair enough," he said. She held his hand. Silas Beaumont completed the survey in 2 days. His findings were precise, documented, and unambiguous. The upper tributary was a hydrologically distinct water source from the Henderson Agricultural Channel. The draw point on Evelyn's property was 32 feet inside her boundary line. The 3-year measurement record she had kept matched the surveyed flow data within acceptable variance. There was no legitimate basis for including the upper tributary in the Henderson water rights sale. He put his name and license number on every page. Marshal Denton took the survey findings, and the injunction and the Henderson affidavit, and the easement to Wade Pruitt's office in Harlan Creek on a Friday afternoon. She was not there for that meeting. She did not need to be. She had Denton's account of it afterward, delivered with the same measured precision he brought to everything. Pruitt had his lawyers present. They had reviewed the injunction. They had reviewed the survey findings. They had reviewed the affidavit. There had been a period of consultation behind closed doors, which Denton had waited outside with the patience of a man who had waited outside many closed doors, and then the door had opened, and Pruitt himself had come out. He had looked, Denton said, like a man who had done the math. He asked what the federal authority would accept as resolution. Denton told her. "And," she said, "full withdrawal of the water rights challenge. Restoration of Henderson's road access. A letter acknowledging that the Consolidated Land Company had no legitimate claim on the upper tributary access of Black Pine Creek." Denton paused. He also, without being asked, offered to compensate Henderson for the duress of the original transaction. She blinked. "He offered that voluntarily?" "His lawyers suggested it," Denton said. "I believe they advised him it was less costly than the alternative." She sat with that for a moment. "What's the alternative?" "Criminal charges for obstruction of a federal survey process," Denton said. "And a civil proceeding for coordinated interference with property rights that could open his entire land operation to federal review." He looked at her. "His lawyers are good ones. They know when to cut losses." She nodded slowly. She felt the shape of it settle, not triumph exactly, which was too loud a word for what this felt like. Something quieter. Something that felt like a room finally coming to temperature after a long cold season. "It's over?" she said. "The federal matter is resolved pending his written withdrawal, which I expect on my desk by Monday." Denton stood. He picked up his hat. "Miss Harper, what you did filing correctly, documenting thoroughly, making the ride twice, that's what won this. Not the marshals, not the injunction, the work you did before any of us were involved." She looked at him. "A man named Caleb Whitaker held this property together while I did that work." Denton nodded once. "Good men are worth holding on to," he said. He rode out. She stood in her yard and listened to the creek. That evening she made dinner. A real dinner, not trail food, not the quick, practical meals of the past weeks. She cooked the way she had cooked, before everything fell apart, before the trial, before she had stopped doing things that were not strictly necessary for survival. She used the good flour and the herbs from the garden and the last of the dried apples she had been saving since October. Caleb came in from the barn and stopped in the doorway. He looked at the table. He looked at her. He looked at the table again. "Sit down," she said. He sat. They ate. They talked about the survey, about Denton's account of Pruitt's lawyers, about what Henderson had said when she'd ridden past his place that afternoon and he'd come out to the fence. Henderson had said, I'm glad it's right. And she had said, so am I, Jack. And they were not friends and might never be, but they were neighbors again. And in this valley, that was something. What does Pruitt do now? Caleb asked. Finds another valley, she said. Men like that don't stop. They just redirect. She passed him the bread. But not this one, not this property. He took the bread. No, he agreed. Not this one. After dinner, they sat on the porch. The summer dark was warm and full of sound. The creek, the horses shifting in the paddock, somewhere to the north an owl asking its permanent question. December had her head over the paddock fence again. She was looking at both of them. She had been doing that all evening, which Evelyn found both transparent and endearing. I've been thinking about the ridgeline, Caleb said. She looked at him. The cabin's solid enough, he said. The cattle are established. I could run the operation from lower down and ride up for the roundups and the seasons that need it. He was looking at the mountains, not at her. The way he said things that mattered sideways, steady, giving her room. It wouldn't have to be a choice, between up there and down here. She understood what he was saying. She understood the full weight of it, a man who had built his solitude carefully, on a mountain, over 7 years, telling her that he was willing to build something different. Your cabin on the ridgeline. It'll keep, he said. Good building. You'd come down. I'd come down, he said. If there was something worth coming down for. She looked at the paddock. At December, who was watching them with the frank interest of an animal who understood more than she was given credit for. This property needs more hands, Evelyn said. Spring is going to be a full operation with the federal claim confirmed. 3 horses, the garden, the upper pasture once the water access is secure. It is, he agreed. And the barn has a room, she said. It's been established that it's adequate. He looked at her then. The almost smile. It's adequate, he confirmed. It wouldn't be permanent, she said. The barn. That would be temporary. Temporary, he said carefully. Until we figured out something more sensible, she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her directly now, no sideways, no careful angles. Just Caleb Whitaker looking at Evelyn Harper, across a porch in the summer dark with everything he was thinking visible on his face. How long do you figure that would take? He said. I don't know, she said. I've never done this before. Not the right way. Neither have I, he said, not the right way. She looked at him. He looked at her. Denver snorted from the paddock, which broke the moment just enough to make it breathable. Stay, she said. Through the fall. Through the first round with the federal confirmation process. Help me get this operation where it should be. She paused. And we'll figure out the rest as we go. He looked at her for a long time. All right, he said. Not a grand declaration. Not a promise wrapped in ceremony. Just a man saying yes to the right thing in the right way, which was exactly what she had needed, and exactly what she had learned, after everything, to recognize. Silas Beaumont and Clara left on Saturday morning. Silas shook Caleb's hand and then turned to Evelyn and said, without preamble, you should come back to Denver sometime. There's a water law symposium in November. Your documentation would be of significant educational value to the people in that room. She looked at him. You want me to present my records? I want you to teach people what 3 years of correct methodology looks like, he said. There are homesteaders all over this territory, losing water claims they should win, because nobody ever showed them how to build a record. She thought about it. She thought about a course in Denver 4 years ago, and a meticulous man who had taught her something that had, eventually, saved everything she had. She thought about what it meant to pass that forward. November, she said. November, he confirmed. Clara embraced her, which was unexpected and entirely welcome, and then they rode out, and the property went quiet in the particular way it did when the unusual had passed and the ordinary was coming back. The ordinary was good. She had not always known that. She knew it now. The weeks that followed were the most productive of Evelyn's 3 years on the property. The federal confirmation came through in late August. Hartley sent the official documentation by post. 7 pages of careful federal language that amounted to, "This water is yours. This access is yours. These records are accepted. This claim is confirmed." She read all 7 pages twice and then folded them and put them in the box with the provisional notice and the Henderson affidavit and the easement, and she put the box on the shelf above the fireplace where she could see it. Caleb had moved his essential things from the ridgeline by then. He rode up twice a week for the cattle, came back by evening, and the rhythm of the property reorganized itself around 2 people instead of one in a way that felt less like addition and more like correction, like a thing that had always been slightly off balance, finding its proper center. They worked well together. She had known this from the fence posts. From the first afternoon he had held December steady while she worked the mare's hoof, but knowing it in small doses and living it daily were different things. And the daily version was better than she had let herself imagine. He did not try to run things. He did not offer opinions she hadn't asked for. He noticed what needed doing, and he did it, and when he had a view he said so plainly, and when she disagreed he engaged with her disagreement rather than retreating from it. And twice she was right, and once he was right, and neither of them kept score. Jack Henderson's wife Martha recovered enough to ride in town by September, which the whole valley noted and which brought Henderson a general goodwill he had been short on since the water rights business. Henderson came by once, in early September, ostensibly to return a borrowed fence tool, and actually to look at the property and at the 2 of them working in the east pasture and to say, as he rode away, "It's a good operation, Miss Harper." "I'm glad it held. So am I, Jack," she said again. Pruitt's withdrawal letter arrived at Hartley's office the Monday after Denton had promised it. Hartley sent her a copy with a single handwritten line at the bottom, "Well done." She put it in the box with everything else. Gerald Calloway stopped her on the street in early October. He was outside his store, the same step he had been sweeping the morning. She rode in with the marshals, and he said her name, and she stopped and looked at him. "Miss Harper," he said, I'd like to welcome your custom back. If you're willing." She looked at him for a moment. "I'll think about it," she said. She didn't say it unkindly. She meant it. She was a fair woman, and he was not a terrible man, and she had not yet decided where the line was between the forgiveness she could honestly extend and the part that would take more time. She was willing to do the work of figuring that out. She thought he understood that. He nodded and went back to his step. On the last Saturday of October, Caleb came in from the barn with a particular expression, focused, decided, the face of a man who has been thinking something through and has arrived at the end of the thinking. She was at the kitchen table, going over the fall accounts. She looked up. "I need to ask you something," he said. She put down her pen. "All right." He sat across from her. He didn't take his hat off because he was still in his coat from outside, and he didn't position himself carefully. He just sat and looked at her, the way he looked at things he was serious about. "I've been down here 4 months," he said. "I know." "It's not the barn that I'm thinking about," he said. "The barn is fine. The barn isn't the point." "I know that, too," she said. He looked at her. "I want to build something here," he said. "With you. Not just the operation. Not just the water claim and the horses and the federal documentation." He was choosing words with his usual care, the way he did when the words had to carry exactly the right weight. "I want to come home to this place and have you be in it. I want you to know that when I ride up to the ridgeline I'm coming back. Not because the barn is adequate, but because this is where I'm supposed to be." He paused. "I'm not asking you to be ready for everything at once. I'm asking if you're willing to move in that direction. With me." Deliberately, she looked at him across the kitchen table. She thought about a July road and an empty bag and a man who wrote down her list. She thought about fence posts and coffee at the paddock and a telegram that said both creeks holding and a hand in the dark of a barn. She thought about what it had taken to trust again, the slowness of it, the carefulness of it, the way it had built itself out of small, honest moments until it was something she couldn't walk around anymore. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah, I've been ready," she said. "For a while now. I was just making sure you were." He looked at her. Something broke open behind his eyes, not dramatically, just quietly, the way something long held releases when it's finally safe to. "I've been ready since August," he said. "I know," she said. "December told me." He looked at the window where the mare's head was visible over the paddock fence, watching the cabin with her usual frank interest. He looked back at Evelyn. "That horse," he said, "has excellent judgment," she said. "We've established this." He stood up. He came around the table and she stood too, and he put his hands on her face, the same way she had put her hand on his jaw at the gate, just that, just the warmth and steadiness of it. And she looked up at him and let herself be looked at, fully, without armor. He kissed her, simple, deliberate, the way he did everything. She put her hand against his chest and felt his heart going faster than his face ever let on, and she thought, there it is. There it is. The thing underneath the stillness and the patience and the careful, unhurried way of moving through the world. There was a heart in there that had been hurt and had healed and had quietly, over the course of one summer on a mountain road, decided to try again. So had hers. When they stepped back, she was looking at him, and he was looking at her, and December was undoubtedly watching from the paddock, and neither of them cared at all. "I'll ride up to the ridgeline next week," he said. "Bring the rest of my things down. The cedar cabin will keep," she said. "It will. He good building." She smiled. She turned back to the kitchen table. She picked up her pen. "I need to finish the fall accounts," she said. "I'll start on dinner," he said. He moved to the stove. She sat at the table. The accounts were straightforward, and she moved through them with the practiced ease of 3 years of careful record-keeping. And behind her, she could hear him working, and the horses were in the paddock. And the creek ran along the edge of the property. And the box on the shelf above the fireplace held 7 pages of federal confirmation, and a provisional claim, and an affidavit, and an easement, and the whole documented truth of what it had taken to hold this place. Outside, December was quiet now, no longer watching. Satisfied, apparently, that everyone had arrived where they were supposed to be. She had always been the smartest one on the property. The fall light came through the window and lay across the kitchen table, and Evelyn Harper sat in it and did her accounts and listened to the man she had chosen moving behind her in the space they had both decided to call home, not because it was given to them, not because it was easy, but because they had each looked at the other and at this place and at everything it had cost and had said, plainly and deliberately, yes. This. Here. That was the whole of it. That was the truth of it, clear and solid and entirely their own 2 people who had each survived the worst kind of losing, who had met on a July road with nothing but honesty between them, and had built, out of water records and fence posts and federal injunctions and coffee at a paddock fence, something that no court could contest, and no man with a ledger could purchase, and no valley's opinion could diminish. They had built a home, and they had chosen it with their eyes open. That was enough. That was everything. That was exactly and precisely what it was supposed to be.